Hi, welcome. This is Karen C., Director of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act Federal Programs. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. The purpose of the information that we're going to share today is to talk about how LEAs can maximize their ESSER funds amidst declining state and local revenue. We'll look at the timeline for ESSER funds, the flexibility in the use of these funds, the role of reporting requirements, and the role that these requirements play in expending and drawing down the funds, the State Department's role in ensuring that allowable uses of funds, and then we will look at the LEA application process for applying for the ESSER funds. Before we get started though, I want to quickly address the equitable services requirement for which LEAs with non-public schools within their boundaries have a responsibility to consult and provide services. The CARES Act requires LEAs that receive ESSER funds to provide equitable services in the same manner as provided under Section 1117 of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Under ESEA, the LEA calculates equitable participation based on the number of low-income students in each participating non-public school in the LEA. Information from the U.S. Department of Ed provided to states on April 30th bases the non-public share on total enrollment rather than on the number of low-income children living in the LEA's boundaries and attending non-public schools. These are two very different ways to calculate services to non-public schools, and states, including Idaho, are awaiting for clarification. For this reason, we are not able to answer any questions today around equitable services. We will, however, immediately communicate with you as soon as we receive more information. In the meantime, the 34 LEAs with non-public schools within their boundaries can use this time to communicate an intent to participate form to the non-public schools to identify which of these schools may be interested in services and which schools are not. And then in that way, be ready to proceed as soon as Idaho has the calculation clarification it needs. Michelle Clement Taylor, sorry about that, Michelle, has an ESSER Fund intent to participate form, which will be sent out soon to federal program directors for the districts with non-public schools. And this ESSER Fund intent to participate form will also be posted on the SDE Equitable Services website, as well as the coronavirus website under the federal program section. Superintendent Ibarra's 3 strategic plan goals drive our work. We support the idea that it's important for students to persevere in life and be ready for college and career, that all education stakeholders are mutually responsible for student progress, and that Idaho must attract and retain great teachers and leaders in Idaho. On March 13th, 2020, the President identified the nation in a state of emergency as a result of COVID-19. Congress wrote the CARES Act legislation, which became law when the President signed it on March 27th. Close to a month later, the U.S. Department of Ed provided states with a certification and agreement application. Idaho completed that application and submitted it to the department on May 15th, which was a Friday. By Monday, less than a full business day later, on May 18th, Idaho received its grant award notification. The link to the LEA job form application was released today, and as those applications are submitted back to us, LEAs will receive an acknowledgement email from Lisa English identifying the application as received and complete. And I understand that Highland School District has the honor of being the first district to submit its LEA application. Forest Bird has submitted its application, and Homedale, as far as I know, Lisa is managing that. A couple of our amazing IT staff are revising code in the GRA specific to the ESSER fund requirements. This process is not complete and won't be complete for at least a couple more weeks. But as soon as it is, LEAs will be notified to begin their drawdowns. September 30th, 2022 is the last day to obligate the ESSER funds. The U.S. Department of Ed is responsible for providing guidance to states on how to implement the law. You will hear me make several references to the department's May 8th FAQ guidance. This document gives critical guidance in the two areas we're focused today, the use of funds and the LEA application. May 8th is the first time states have received clarity from the U.S. Department of Ed in these two areas since the CARES Act was signed into law on March 27th. Before we look at the allowable activities, it's important to note that ESSER funds do not have a supplement, not supplant provision. This means that these funds may be used to replace state or local funds under two conditions. Number one, that the funds are used for allowable activities, and number two, that maintenance of effort requirements are met. In fact, the U.S. Department of Ed cautions states and LEAs to carefully consider maintenance of effort requirements in spending these ESSER funds. So for example, and this is a scenario that a district brought to me, but replacing local funds with ESSER funds to support the delivery of special education activities could result in an LEA becoming out of compliance with the maintenance of effort requirements with IDEA. LEAs may use ESSER funds to support the delivery of special education, that's one of the allowable activities, but should do so in addition to the state and local funds already allocated to the program. When planning for the use of ESSER funds, it's important for LEAs to consider similar implications to other programs as well, such as the ESEA federal programs. So let's take a look at the allowable activities. The allowable uses of ESSER funds are outlined in section 18003D of the CARES Act, and this is at one of the appendices in the LEA application. Expenditures incurred beginning March 13th are eligible for reimbursement, and these funds do not expire until September 30th, 2022. This list of allowable activities has been widely referenced in webinars and email updates from federal programs. It's been published on the coronavirus.idaho.gov webpage under the schools link in the federal programs section. And this list of allowable activities is also referenced in the governor's May 20th updated FAQ document titled 5% Reduction Plan. I want to spend a couple of minutes on this list of allowable activities by addressing what these activities have in common with each other. Equitable access and participation is a theme throughout the list of allowable activities. School closures have increased challenges and barriers to equitable access for students in low-income families, as well as for homeless students, students in foster care, English learners, migratory children, and for students with disabilities. Students who are already behind and not meeting standards before the pandemic are at risk of falling further behind and of becoming disconnected from school altogether. The first allowable use of ESSER funds on this list authorizes any activity allowable under the programs that protect these subgroups of children. For example, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act programs, IDEA, McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, and it also includes the Adult Education and Family Literacy Act and the Perkins CTE Act. The fourth activity on this list addresses the unique needs of these subgroup populations. The third activity on the list focuses on providing principals the resources necessary to address needs of individual schools, recognizing that schools with students who experience challenges to learning require more resources. The 11th activity on this list includes using funds for summer learning as a way to address the needs of low-income students, students with disabilities, English learners, migratory students, students experiencing homelessness, and children in foster care. Another theme in the list of fund uses focuses around building systems and learning from each other by coordinating response efforts as identified in this list as number 2 and number 5, both within the LEA and across agencies. The number 8 activity on this list provides for the coordination of meal planning, preparation and delivery to students, and number 12 captures the other activities necessary to maintain the operation and continuity of services in the LEA to continue to employ existing staff. The wellness theme is called out in number 7 through the purchase of supplies to sanitize and clean facilities, to provide professional development for staff in number 6 around minimizing the spread of infectious diseases, and to provide mental health services and support as stated in the number 10 activity on this list. The last theme from this list of allowable activities centers around distance learning in number 8 and in number 9, providing hardware, software, and connectivity for all students, which may include assistive technology or adaptive equipment from students with disabilities. The use of funds activities are closely tied to the reporting requirements, which we will look at in just a minute. The U.S. Department of Education acknowledges the flexibility of the ESSER funds and then identifies in their May 8th Q&A examples of this flexibility by specifically calling out 2 areas of focus where an LEA may use the ESSER funds. The first one is for materials and supplies necessary to maintain school operations during the pandemic, such as PPE and cleaning and sanitizing materials. And number 2, activities to support distance learning for all students, but especially disadvantaged or at-risk students and their teachers. This question and response from the Department of Ed is significant because of all the flexibility examples that could be provided. Ed is choosing to purchase of supplies and expenditures for implementing distance learning as priorities. Let's take a look at how the fund activities are tied to reporting requirements. First, we're going to look at the 55 LEAs who will receive an allocation of more than $150,000. These LEAs have different reporting requirements than the other LEAs. Expenditures for LEAs with an allocation of more than $150,000 are tied to projects or activities. Funds will be drawn down at a project level. In the GRA, these LEAs will be asked to tie the drawdown amount to a project. This includes giving the project a title, a brief description, identifying the amount of the project for that drawdown period, and tying the expenditure to one or more object codes. The GRA for the expenditure will also include a section on creating or retaining jobs, and information tied to any subcontractors, if that's appropriate, will also be requested. Let's take a look at several project examples that an LEA with an allocation of more than $150,000 might use for GRA drawdowns. These project ideas are suggested as examples only. They don't represent a comprehensive list of possible ways to spend the ESSER funds, nor are they intended to be interpreted as limiters to the acceptable uses of allowable activities. Project examples are closely aligned to the allowable use of funds. For example, an LEA with an allocation of more than $150,000 might submit a GRA request for a distance learning technology project. That includes expenditures for hardware, software, and connectivity. Another project might be called facilities and include expenditures for cleaning supplies and salary and benefit expenditures for custodial staff to sanitize LEA facilities. Another project example could be titled Professional Development and include purchase services expenditures for the presenter, salaries and benefits for the staff attending the training, and supplies and materials related to the professional development. Another example, an LEA with an allocation of more than $150,000 might submit in a GRA request could be a wellness project that includes expenditures for health supplies such as wipes, thermometers, masks, as well as purchase services expenditures specifically for mental health services and supports. A serving meals project might include expenditures for the cost of food, salaries and benefits for preparing the meals, which could include food service staff when other funding sources are not sufficient, and salaries and benefits for the bus drivers who are delivering the meals to specific drop-off locations. A community collaboration project might include expenses related to bringing together multiple people from both within the LEA and across several agencies to plan and prepare for public health emergencies. Another example, an LEA with an allocation of more than $150,000 might submit a GRA request for, could be an employing existing staff project that continues to pay salaries for paraprofessionals, for example, for duties related to COVID-19, such as to check in with students virtually or through front porch visits. Salaries for paraprofessionals might also include time spent preparing materials for learning as directed by the certified teacher. A summer learning project could fund supplies, materials, and meals for students, salaries and benefits for the teachers, and transportation costs related to getting the students to and from the summer learning location, if that is appropriate, and if there is not another funding source for transportation. LEAs with an allocation of $150,000 or less do not have to tie their expenditures to a project or an activity, but rather they tie their expenditures to an object code, which are listed here on the slide. Salaries and benefits, purchase services, supplies, materials, travel, professional development, transportation, capital objects, and indirect costs. Please use fund number 252 and revenue code 445900 for ESSER funds. If your LEA will have a larger than normal carryover for Title 1A or for any of the other ESEA programs this year, another idea might be to take a look at your expenses paid with general funds from the beginning of the 2019-2020 school year. If any of those expenditures are allowable under Title 1A or any of the other ESEA federal programs, then consider a journal entry to move the general fund expenditures to the appropriate ESEA grant. This may be a way to free up some general funds. If you're not sure about the allowability of an expenditure, there are 3 questions here to ask. Does the expenditure prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus? Will coding this expenditure to coronavirus in 2019-2020 still allow the LEA to meet maintenance of effort requirements? And did this expenditure occur on or after March 13th? States have a role and a requirement to oversee ESSER spending. According to the U.S. Department of Ed, states award subgrants to LEAs to address the impact COVID-19 has had and continues to have on schools. Federal cost principles apply to ESSER funds, including that expenditures be necessary and reasonable. Idaho assured in its state application that technical assistance to LEAs on the use of ESSER funds for remote learning will be provided so that students can continue to learn when schools are closed. And this webinar is one example of that. Within 60 days of receiving the ESSER funds at the state level, and for us, we received our funds May 18th, states are required to submit a report to U.S. Ed on its monitoring plan for ensuring funds are used for allowable purposes. So states can expect to be monitored by Ed on the use of its ESSER funds, and LEAs can be expected to be monitored on the use of its ESSER funds. LEA ESSER fund allocations were revised after states received guidance from the U.S. Department of Ed on May 8, stating that new and significantly expanding LEA charters in 2020-2021 are eligible for the CARES Act ESSER funds. The revised LEA allocation list is dated May 13th, and it replaces the previously published list dated April 23rd. Idaho's application was submitted, as mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, and Idaho has received the state portion of ESSER funds. The most recent update is that LEAs receiving an ESSER fund allocation were emailed earlier today and now have the link to the JOT form application. An email with this link was sent to superintendents, federal program directors, and business managers, but please only submit one application per LEA. So let's take a quick look at the application. There are 4 sections to the LEA application. 3 of the sections require the signature of the superintendent or authorized representative. Part A is the cover sheet and requires the signature of the superintendent or authorized representative. Part B of the application includes several assurances and also requires the superintendent's signature or that of an authorized representative. These assurances include important information. Please be sure you read them. First, expenditures that are not allowed are identified as executive salaries and benefits for people not employed by the LEA, and expenditures related to state or local teacher or faculty unions or associations. There are 2 sections in Part B on equitable services, which includes LEA's consultation responsibilities to non-public schools within the LEA's boundaries. There is a maintenance of effort compliance section, a provision to compensate employees and contractors during COVID-19 to the greatest extent practicable, a section on reporting requirements compliance, and a section assuring cooperation related to the examination of expenditure records. Part C includes 2 sections with check-off box responses. Number 1, how the LEA will determine its most important educational needs as a result of COVID-19. The LEA's timeline for providing services to both public schools and to non-public schools, if that's appropriate for the LEA. The extent to which the LEA intends to use ESSER funds to promote distance learning. How the LEA intends to assess and address student learning gaps in the fall. And identification of the 12 activity options for which the LEA is considering using its ESSER funds. Part D includes the GEPA or General Education Provision Act requirements. These include general assurances required for any federal award, assurances related to equity for students and teachers, compliance with the uniform administrative requirements, cost principles, and audit requirements, and compliance with the Office of Management and Budget guidelines. This section does require a signature of the superintendent or authorized representative. The appendices are included for your information and do not require any action. Appendix A includes the ESSER Fund Law 18003, which is specific to LEAs and is where the 12 allowable activities are identified. It also includes a section on maintenance of effort requirements and a section on reporting requirements. Appendix B includes the LEA ESSER Fund allocation list. If you want to print the application before you hit the submit button, you must print it before you hit the submit button. The submit button sends the application to Lisa English, who is responding with an email acknowledging receipt of the application. Our objective today was to provide information you can use to apply for funds and to spend the funds. We look forward to your questions and we'll do our best to answer them. We really appreciate you joining us today, and we look forward to receiving your applications.
So Karen, first question, I'll just read them off for you.
Okay.
First question is, do we need to re-inform our private school and do another intent to participate with the ESSER Funds?
I'm assuming that the original consultation was because of the ESEA funds. So it is correct that a separate consultation is required for the ESSER funds.
Second question, on the allowable activities section, do we choose activities to be done this year, next year, or both?
Probably both. I would imagine that most LEAs have already been incurring COVID-19 expenditures since March 13th. So when you go to the GRA to begin drawing down your funds, you could start drawing down those expenditures and keep going for as long as the money lasts.
Next question is, where is this PowerPoint located for reference? And it will be located on both the coronavirus website and the SDE website. And then there's a related question, will this webinar be archived and sent out ASAP? Answer is yes. We will include a link to the PowerPoint as well as a link to the archived webinar, and we will send that out this afternoon. Next question. Please review less than 150K reporting.
Sure. So LEA is receiving $150,000 or less than $150,000. You will be very familiar with this process because it's very similar to what you're already doing in your GRA drawdowns, and that's tying your expenditures to object codes. For example, salaries and benefits, purchase services, travel, and that sort of thing.
Next question is a follow-up. Does our new intent to participate form need to specifically state the use of the ESSER funds?
The purpose of the intent to participate form is to identify whether or not that non-public school would like to receive services with these ESSER funds. And remember, it's services, it's never money to a non-public school. So it's just to identify whether or not they're interested in services and, in which areas.
Next question, do reimbursed funds have to go back into their original accounts, or can they go to the general fund? For example, if funds reimburse food service, do they have to go back into food service, or can it go to the general fund?
If a district used general funds on an ESSER fund allowable activity, you could reimburse the general funds with the ESSER funds.
Next question, what are the two funds again? Fund 252, go on page 12.
Okay, thank you for that. Revenue code 445900.
Next question. Question number 12 on the acceptable use seems very broad. Was it meant to be a catch-all sentence?
I understand that statement and question. The guidance from the U.S. Department of Ed, and I believe it's in the May 8th, they specifically tie that to allowable activities. So some of these 12 activities are more broad than others.
We're not seeing any more questions. We'll give you just a couple of minutes to submit any additional questions you may have. Okay, we do have another one. Equitable service only to privates that take Title I, or does it include any federal funds, Title II?
Yeah, okay, so for ESSER, an LEA with any non-public schools in its LEA boundaries will be consulted with.
Is there a deadline for submitting the application?
I believe it's a year from when we receive the funds. So, I mean, no, there isn't an immediate deadline. I'm expecting, and we've already received several, so I'm expecting to get them quickly.
Next question, we're a small charter school LEA next to a larger LEA. We have private schools in our area. Who does the contacting of private schools? If revenues disperse to private schools, who works out the details?
Thank you for that question. LEA charters are not responsible for equitable services.
Okay, next question, should we use the same intent to participate form, or is the state going to share a new form?
The state will share a new form. That's being, Michelle Clement Taylor has developed a form, and it's currently being vetted. I expect that it'll probably be out within just a few days.
Next question, what rate can you use for charging indirect costs?
Indirect costs need to be reasonable. That's the guidance from the U.S. Department of Ed.
We're not seeing any other questions, but again, we'll give you just a couple minutes to submit additional questions. All right, equitable services only for students who live in your district or for students who attend schools in your district?
It's confusing, isn't it? Because it's a little bit different than ESEA. Under ESSER, these are non-public schools within the LEA's boundary, which is different than ESEA.
And that's any school in the boundary.
Any non-public school within the LEA's boundary, correct.
All right, we're giving you just a minute to submit any further questions. Karen, if they think of additional questions, how should they contact you and submit those?
Sure, we love receiving your questions because it makes us think about things that maybe we're not thinking about. So yes, submit your questions to me or anyone on the federal programs team, and we will be sure to reach out back to you and respond. And if we don't have an answer, we will do some research.
And just once again, we will get a link to the PowerPoint as well as a link to the archived webinar out this afternoon.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time, and more importantly, we appreciate everything you're doing out there to help Idaho's kids. So thank you very much.